The Ukraine-Russia war is really a tragic event, and of course it's Russia which is to blame here. I have taken a closer look at some key economic effects in the paper Russia's Attack on Ukraine, Economic Challenges, Embargo Issues and a New World Order. So this is the EIIW paper 312. And some of the main points can be summarized as follows. So the cyber war perspective is important here, and of course also the internet. It's important to understand which countries are the main donor countries for the Ukraine in terms of giving humanitarian, military and financial aid, and it's not correct what was claimed in the Institute for World Economics from Kiel when they published in the paper 2,218 figures and actually a ranking of countries which is really quite misleading to say the least, and they were actually ignoring there the expenditures on refugees, which for most OECD countries are more than 60% of the total aid given to the Ukraine. And I cannot understand why should it be useful if your topic is to cover humanitarian, financial and military aid. Why would you ignore the elephant in the room and then just write about the smaller aspects? It's definitely wrong that the United States has supported the Ukraine by much more than all EU countries combined, which is a claim made in this paper of the Kiel Institute. Instead, when I take a closer look at the figures and include in this case the commitments or expenditures on Ukrainian refugees, then the EU's expenditures are 4 times as high as those of the US. So I think it's important to understand what is the order of magnitude and what is the correct ranking here. There are a lot of interesting aspects, of course, concerning trade between Germany and Russia or between the EU and Russia. We have other international perspectives. Some of them, of course, also related to international capital flows. There is the big issue of energy perspective. So in this case, particularly the question of an energy import embargo, which could concern either oil or gas from Russia or both. And there is an interesting paper published by Rüdiger Bachmann and 8 other colleagues who were arguing that a German energy embargo would be quite adequate and the economic effects on the German economy would be rather modest, so output would decline at a maximum by 2.2%. I think the order of magnitude is really wrong. It's actually more 5 to 6%. And the point is that first the authors in their model do not allow the unemployment rate to increase, which is strange. And the authors actually also ignore any retaliation from Russia, and this is simply too naive to be true. So in this macro modeling, we have this Bachmann et al. Paper on the one hand, and then several other authors, including the OECD, which are using the NIGEM model. And I think the Bachmann model actually is not a solid macroeconomic approach, not least because they also ignore the effects on the inflation rate, where the World Economic Outlook just published argues that an energy import embargo would drive up the inflation rate by 1.5% on top in 2022 and another 2% in 2023. And this, of course, is also a negative economic welfare. I think it's also naive to argue that imposing an oil import embargo on Russia would more or less stop the war. That's, I think, not realistic, because obviously the EU countries would then import oil much more in the future from OPEC countries and from the US, and that means these countries will deliver less fossil fuels to Asia, and of course Russia will then be able to sell at some price discount excessive oil and gas to Asia. Okay, with gas that's obviously more difficult than in the case of oil. An interesting question covered in the paper concerns refugees and migrants, and there are actually interesting empirical findings for the impact of Ukrainian immigrants in Poland, 2014 to 18, where a paper by the Polish Central Bank shows that the output growth rate has been increased by 0.4%. And of course, it's clear that refugees is not the same as migrants, but at least part of the refugees after some time, that is once they have a fairly good knowledge of the language of the host country, they will be integrated in the labor market. So yeah, there are a lot of interesting aspects which to some extent indeed concern also the supply side of the economy. I think an important aspect is the discussion about an EU Eastern enlargement of the EU, in this case of the Ukraine. I think this is nice at first sight, but it's a highly risky political project on the other hand, because there is a large risk that once the Ukraine is a member country of the EU single market, and we would repeat the EU Eastern enlargement of 2004 in the sense that some countries would say, yeah, we accept immediately the immigrants from the Ukraine, and other countries would say, yes, we want to have some adjustment period. So in the first EU Eastern enlargement round, that were 7 years, and Germany, for instance, opted for the 7-year transition period. In the first EU Eastern enlargement, this then brought a massive concentration of immigrants from Eastern EU countries to the UK, which in the end was overwhelmed, particularly when there was a massive recession then in 2008-9 by this immigration, and this brought a lot of anti-immigration sentiments, and the result in the end was Brexit. So we do not need another Brexit. We do not want another Brexit. So if there should be an EU-Ukrainian enlargement, one should be very careful in organizing such a political project. Yeah, the world economic order definitely will change after the Ukraine-Russian war. So a big question, how we can make sure that a rule-based order will continue, and what will be then the role of the US, of China, of Europe, and so on. Thank you very much for your attention.